told this story in the U.S., but once a year a foreign government hires me to create a blueprint for that country's private capital markets. Since apparently I'm the only one who's ever studied the private capital markets, now foreign countries hire me to do this. And I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years. Well, last year, Ukraine. I'm real big behind in the old Soviet Union countries because the textbook, Private Capital Markets, has been translated into Russian. And so and plus they've translated 30 or 40 of my academic articles into Russian over time. And so all in Russia and Ukraine and in the various countries I'm in. So a year or two ago, I'm over in Ukraine speaking for a week and a half, 3 times a day, speaking to the Ukrainians about the blueprint and how to compete in the global economy, because I speak more about that now than I do about what we're about to talk about. Well, anyway, the funniest thing happened in the introduction. Ukraine, the interesting thing about Ukraine, if you've never been there, is that it's in some ways very similar to the U.S. The government of Ukraine speaks Ukrainian, but the people speak Russian. So like the U.S., the government and the people are speaking 2 different languages. So in any event, all my talks are translated from Russian in English, not Ukrainian. But even though the government put the whole show out, I find that kind of interesting. But I had sent them ahead of time my pack of lies 1-page bio, right? You know, it may be the same pack of lies bio in here, you know, blah, 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 blah. Well, someone in Ukraine, and I never found out who did this, took a manual typewriter, because I eventually saw what they had done. They added a line to the bottom of my pack of lies bio, and that was used to introduce me to all these 20 or 30 talks I did across Ukraine. Here's what the line said. It said at the very end, apparently, Mr. Slee is the best America has to offer on the topic of global competition. Well, high praise indeed. So I always laugh when I got introduced that way. So I was half expected Mike to say, apparently Rob is the best America has to offer on the topic of private capital markets. So, well, my goal this morning, I have one major overriding goal, and I will achieve this goal, is to put you in the top 1% in the world, your knowledge in the top 1% of the world in private capital markets. If you're willing players, we'll get there. All you got to do is be willing players for us to get there. So, and frankly, it's going to be that hard for you to get there because nobody knows anything about the private capital markets. So, okay, so let's wade in. So what are we talking about? We're going to be talking first, for the first hour, we are going to break every hour, so don't get nervous. We're going to talk first about the public versus private markets, because if you've had any sort of academic education, like a corporate finance course or anything, what they really taught you about was behavior of the large public capital markets. They never say this, but that's what they're really. So when I wrote PCMs, and it was first published in 2004, which you've received as the second edition that came out in May of this year, if you would have Googled the words private capital markets in 2004, how many hits would you have? 0. So those words hadn't made it into the literature or the language yet, which is curious because the majority of the world's GDP and employment is in the private capital market. So it's like, what's been going on here? So we've got a major disconnect. So I'll try to at least show you the difference, compare and contrast between public and private, and why there's such totally different markets driven by different behaviors. And then we're going to talk about the new field of study that the textbook launched called middle market finance. So in 2004, we launched a new field of study. So as opposed to corporate finance, it's called middle market finance. And so I'll finish with that. And this will be a discussion, so I'm going to be asking questions constantly, not to bust you or put you in a bad position, just to get feedback to make sure that some of these ideas are hitting home. All right, so what are these markets? Well, they're venues, because there's a series of sub-markets within the private capital market. So where private capital is raised and private equity interests are exchanged. So there's a lot going on. It's an extremely dynamic market, these private capital markets. I've shown in various articles that the majority of the world's GDP employment takes place in private capital markets, which is a curious thing because, have you ever read that anywhere? Yeah, so I'm the only one right now speaking about that. I'm not sure why that is. We're trying to get that turned around. Certainly a big textbook is a good start, I guess. I will differentiate between financial engineering and value engineering. At least that's my mantra in life. You used to hear a lot about financial engineering as the way to engineer some sort of entree point into a deal. I'm not using it that way. I'm saying that financial engineering is we use valuation, capital formation or capital structure, and transfer knowledge as one to make an investment and financing decision. So that's, for me, it's a holistic. Middle market finance theory is a unified theory in that valuation, capital, and transfer are interdependent on each other, interreliant, interdependent on each other. So that once you use these three legs of the triangle, valuation, capital, and transfer, as one in your decision making, you can start to create value. If you read any of the stuff I write, one of the things I constantly write about is the dramatic underperformance of our infrastructure of private capital, whether it's venture, or private equity, or mezzanine, the tremendous underperformance in returns to their investors that they've gotten over the last 20 years. And how I liken that is they are still using financial engineering in the old-fashioned traditional sense that you engineer to get into a deal. What they lack is the value engineering. Because do we teach value engineering aside from this school, at any other school in the world? No, I mean, we really don't. We sort of left value engineering, the creation of value once you're in a deal, we've left it to our own device, and we haven't educated or trained on that sufficiently in the middle market, certainly. And so what's happened is the MBAs, and I is one of them, the MBAs go and learn about financial engineering. Well, I could train a monkey on how to get into the deal, where the value is created is once you're in the deal, the value engineering, that's where we fall short. So when Connie said that the deals underperform, and it's really true, I mean, the vast majority of the M&A deals that not only I've seen in 25 years but have been done have severely underperformed. And I think what's happened is the value engineering has been left to chance, and that's just killing it. So the place you start with value engineering is this using a holistic body of knowledge to start making better decisions. That's a pretty good place to start, I think. You will see this chart or something that looks just like it several times today. We're going to talk about segmentation. So I'm real big on market segmentation, meaning that we don't have a monolithic market. What we have is a segmented capital market. Small companies, middle market companies, and large companies. So the last U.S. census, and I apologize for this, I only have numbers from the U.S., where companies have reported at least one employee, and that's your key thing here, key in on. We have almost 5.5 million small businesses, meaning doing less than $5 million a year in revenues. That's your key here. Middle market is $5 to $1 billion in sales. Basically, we have 300,000. We don't have that many anymore. The census was done prior to the most recent collapse. We probably have, 275,000 middle market companies now. Either 25,000 have either gone out of business or fallen down. Sort of like the middle class of the U.S. It tends to go south, not north. And then we have a little less than a couple thousand large companies, most of which are public, doing over $1 billion in sales. Now the thing about the 300,000 middle market companies on this list, even though I just said that there's fewer right now, is that 80 or 90% of them are in the $5 to $50 million range. So what we have is a zillion small businesses, 0 to 5 million, and then half a zillion sort of lower middle market businesses, 5 to 50, and then a smattering of businesses as you get bigger. So that's the census of the market, so to speak. Now each segment generates a different percent of the U.S. GDP. Once again, I apologize. We're just now digging into the world's segmented markets, and I'll explain that in a second because Pepperdine has a meaningful place in all of this. So small businesses in the U.S. and Europe is fairly similar to this from what we can see. Generates 15%, so you have an awful lot of companies generating a relatively small amount of the U.S. GDP. The middle market generates a substantial part of the GDP, so a few 100,000 companies, 40%. Well, you got to give them their due. The large public companies do generate a substantial amount of the U.S. GDP. Now, what's interesting about this is if you add the small and medium private companies, you end up at around 53% of the U.S. GDP is generated by private companies. So some part of the middle market are public companies, right? So it isn't the 55% that the chart might indicate, it's around 53%. As far as we can tell, the EU is the same exact number, 53% of the EU's GDP, because they're studying this in the EU. I don't know what it is yet in Asia or South America, but people now are studying that, so as soon as we have that, I'll write a big article and sort of do an aggregation article on that. My suspicion is that as countries develop, it settles into this statistic. I don't think it's said by chance that the EU and the US ended up settling at the same point. I think that's what will happen in Asia, and I think that's what will happen in South America. Given enough time, I think we'll all be in the same place. is what I'm trying to say. So from a valuation standpoint, markets are segmented in terms of how they value companies too. Now I'm not saying 100% of the companies are valued relative to this. So if you're a small business, you're always valued relative to 2 to 3, what is that? 2 to 3 X's. What is the X?
Times.
Yeah, times what? What are we multiplying? EBITDA, yeah, recast sort of earnings sort of thing. I've studied and written a lot about small businesses, once again in the U.S. in the last 40 years, have settled in around 2.5 times. Why is that? Why is that such a static sort of multiple? You don't have big swings in the small business. Why did we settle into 2.5 times or so? Our default, yes, go ahead.
Maybe because it's difficult to monitor private.
Yeah, it's partly difficult to monitor. But the default answer for anything I ask for the rest of the day is because that's what the capital markets will allow. See, the debt markets is not what Rob says, although it should be good enough for you from now on. But no, it's really that how capital forms in the market is what sets the multiple range. So over time, regardless of what was going on in the economy or interest rates, recession, depression, it's been around 2.5 times because that's the banks only lend so much, the sellers will only sell their notes so much, and the buyers only bring so much equity to small deals, and that's pretty much static. That's pretty much. Now what we'll see in the middle market is look at the broad range. The lower middle market tends to be lower middle market 5 to 150 million in sales. Tends to be a 4 to 7 market, then you have an 8 to 9 market and you go out. So we have a much broader range of EBITDA multiples. So once again, what's happening there is, okay, who's actually weighted into private capital markets? The book, not the movie, the book. Okay, there's only one variable, I say in that book after studying correlations, that drives these multiples. Do you remember what that is? There's only one that drives the range of multiples between 4 and 11. What drives it? Yes.
Liquidity?
Yeah, the senior lending multiples. So debt lending multiples. So whatever the senior lenders are doing, when they're cash flow lending, we get to higher multiples. When they're asset-based lending, we tend to be lower multiples, or no multiples in that case. So it's only the debt lending, senior debt lending multiples, because everybody else in the capital structure sort of takes their lead from that. And so that's the only meaningful, when I did correlations against the various capital types, it was only the senior debt lenders that drove this. So right now, in the lower middle market, that 550 million sales, that's a 4 to 7 multiple market. Where are we right now in that? Are we at the 7 or are we at the 4? Where are the senior lenders at? Are they real aggressive right now or scared of the real shadow because the whole banking system is technically insolvent? Oh, I said it. I imagine the Fed police will come and get me anyway. And so I wrote an article. Now this is the funny. I write constantly. I read 250 articles just because I don't know anything. See, people think you write articles because you know something. No. You write articles because you have an intellectual curiosity. You don't know that topic. You go research it. You put it out there, and everyone says, hey, you moron, and that's how you learn. And so I've gone through that little process 250 times. And I wrote an article back in the middle of 08. Well, here's the math. The U.S. banking system is technically insolvent. You would think that I was just the devil incarnate for saying such a thing. Well, did we pick up a little what the Fed, the little thing the Fed did at that time period that just came out because Bloomberg did their homework? How many trillions of dollars did the Fed put out beyond TARP in that time period? Yes, almost $8 trillion. And, oh, they forgot to not only tell us, but the Treasury Department. Now, how in the world can that ever happen? That a quasi-government agency could put $8 trillion out and forget to mention it. So it looks to me like I was pretty much right in what I was right at the time. Now, is the U.S. banking system technically solvent now? Meaning if they mark to market every piece of paper, where would they be? Done. Out of business. Next week, starting next week, and for the next couple of years, it'd be a bank holiday, and almost all of them will be on. And so as you go out, this enters, and we're still in the valuation part of this, this answers the question, is big better? Well, from a multiple standpoint, yeah. All things being equal, the bigger the company, the more likely it is that the higher the multiple. So right now, in the large public markets, what are we at, a PE of what, 18? I don't even know, but something greater than 12, certainly. So you can start to see, just from this bottom block, how can you create $1 billion worth of wealth, just from what you now know in this? How can you do it? What's the play? What's the arbitrage play? And the hint being arbitrage. how I done it, because I've done it now several times.
Going moving from
Yes, buy left, sell right. So what you do, that's exactly right. So what you do is, at least what I did one time is another buddy and I, a lawyer, and I got together and said, hey, well, let's see what we can do here. I'll have to remember here. And so he had come out of the packaging industry. He'd been general counsel of a middle market packaging company in Canada. And so he'd known some things. His company got sold. So and I got to know him pretty well. So we threw in a few bucks and we went and bought a platform company. So we started zero in sales. We bought a platform company. We paid 6 times EBITDA for that. It was doing about $70 million in sales. And then we did 36 acquisitions. Never paid over 4 times. And then after 3 years, we were running around a run rate of almost $400 million in sales, at which point we knew this thing's going to blow up because neither one of us was exactly great at integration. And so we sold out to a large public company for 11 times earnings. So you see the arbitrage play, bought at 6, bought left of 6, sold out at, and was viewed by the market. Remember, it's not what Rob says, it's what the market says. We were viewed by the market as 11. Now, the big company brought in discipline and all the stuff we didn't have. The big company brought in the discipline, so it all worked out for everybody. Whenever you do one of these mass consolidations, don't fall in love with the result, is all I can say, because we needed to get out when we did. So, all right, so that's what the middle market looks like. We'll come back to this slide a couple more times. So this is going to be a U.S. view of the middle market. Once again, I'm sort of provincial on this. I do business around the world. I talk around the world. I'm just now getting to the point where I'm studying all this around the world. And Pepperdine, once again, has a meaningful place, because every 6 months, I started something with Pepperdine as a partner 4 or 5 years ago, where we surveyed the entire U.S. capital markets, private capital markets, every 6 months. Now I'm exporting that overseas. So he says in 2012 we'll start doing the same, very similar sort of surveys in a couple dozen countries of the world. So we'll have the best possible information for me to give this talk in the future. Then you'll be able to see through all the world. Right now I can only see through the U.S. So what's going on? Well, we've got an extremely large economy in and of itself here in the U.S., the middle market. Every MBA with a checkbook now is a private equity group. And so we've got about 8,000 registered PEGs, private equity group PEGs. Roughly half of them are funded. The other half are fundless funds. So they can go get the money somewhere, but they don't really have a checkbook that's full of money. But they can get it. Presumably they can get it. They have all kinds of dry powder still. So they have over $1 trillion that if they'd love to spend. What's the number one problem? If you have $1 trillion, why aren't they all spending it? What's their number one problem? Nowhere to go with the money. Nowhere to go. Because we're not generating valuable companies in this country anymore. Because
Also because of lending.
well, and the debt lenders, but they can get around the debt lending. That's a very good point. I've seen now dozens of deals where the PEGs had so much equity money, they just went out and wrote the check out. And then debt recapped themselves a year or two later with the presumption the banks would be back in the lending business, which that's anybody's guess. But in any event, so what's happened in the U.S., and this is Rob says, not the book says, is that sometime in the last 10 or 15 years we went into capital preservation mode. Whereas in South America and Asia, they're in appreciation mode. Capital appreciation. Now, is it possible to tread water in a riptide? What happens if you try to, which is what I think we're trying to do in the middle market, what happens if you just say, well, what I'm going to do is sit out all this change and I'm just going to tread water in this riptide? What invariably happens? You drown, you're dead. So you got to swim like crazy, one direction or another. Get out of the riptide. And yet our owners, because they're mainly baby boomers in the middle market, have had it so good, and I'll stay with this sort of nautical vision. Our owners for the last 30 years have been able to just rise with the U.S. tide. So up until about 15 years ago, all you had to do is be in business. Woody Allen had it right. 80% in life, success in life is just showing up. So if you were in the game, the rising tide of American fortunes would just take you with it, and you could just go along for the ride. Well, that all stopped 15 years ago, and so somehow the boomers didn't want to hear that message, the boomer owners, and so they've just been trying to tread water in riptide, which explains how we go from 300,000 middle market companies down to 200 and some thousand, although nobody knows exactly how many, dropping like a rock. They are dropping like a rock, and the reason is they've never really competed in a global economy. True or false, 80% of the American middle market the owners are destroying shareholder value as I speak. It's true. Now, the way I'm going to describe that, I want to describe this mathematically, and I'll prove it later, is that they are not generating returns on investment greater than the cost of capital. The only economy, that means you're destroying shareholder value unless you generate returns on investment greater than the cost of capital. The only economy in the world that knows what its cost of capital is on the private side is the U.S. Because I stand at the altar of the private capital markets. If Pepperdine and I survey this, we know what the U.S. private cost of capital is. That's what we're about to determine in the rest of the world. Because how do you know if you're generating returns on investment greater than cost of capital unless you know what cost of capital is? So you have a missing variable here for the last 30 years. Well, we filled in that variable for the U.S. Now it's time to fill in that variable for the rest of the world, and we'll talk a good bit about that in a couple hours. So the PEGs, surprisingly or shockingly is a better word, own 35,000 or so middle market companies in the U.S. Yes?
Presumably, though, each of these companies knows their own cost of capital, right?
Well, you would think so. That would be a good presumption. The issue with, and the question was, do the owners even know? Not 1 in 100 owners makes a financial decision based on cost of capital. Therein lies the problem. So even if they knew it, what I mean by that is they're not using any sort of mathematical discounted cash flow technique or anything else other than payback or that ought to work. And because this is what we survey, and so it's been shocking to me that the owners are so lifestyle oriented that they're not attempting to create shareholder value, which is like, if you're going to have all the risk of ownership, are these companies risky? They're all one phone call away from oblivion, every single one of them. And so if they have that level of risk, and let's put it to numbers, if they have a 30% equity risk, which is sort of the minimum for the middle market, why wouldn't they require or demand a 30% return every year? Would we? Yeah. If you're going to go buy a corporate bond that promises, now I got to ratchet the numbers down, a corporate bond that promises to pay 7%, would you demand a 7% return? Well, the owners don't do that. They don't demand that 30% return because they're not in it to build value anyways. Not corporate value, they're in it for lifestyle reasons. And so this is what we've uncovered through all the Pepperdine surveys, and this is what's really worrisome to me, that if you have the majority of the U.S. economy is based on people who don't compete in the world and don't attempt to create shareholder value, does this not show up in economic data? We don't hire, we don't pay taxes, we don't do anything. See, this is the problem. Number one problem in America economically is that the majority of the U.S. economy is not creating value in these firms. Number one problem. So I'm the only one who knows this, now you do too, so don't tell anybody, because we don't want anybody else to know this. Well, so somehow the MBA PEGs, because they're almost all MBAs, ended up owning 35,000 companies. How in the world that ever happened? And which is 12% numerically of the 300,000 companies, but it's a lot more than that of the capital, because they buy bigger stuff, right? I mean, the typical PEG would prefer to buy bigger rather than smaller, so they tend to buy middle market stuff and above, so they own maybe 30 to 40% of the equity in the market. So they are big players. Let's just put that out there. They're really, really big players in the middle market. Hedge funds had a little bit of the jealousy of their PEG brothers, so 4 or 5 years ago the hedge funds started dabbling, and they've now bought who knows how many thousands of companies. The hedge funds are different than the PEGs, and the hedge funds don't even attempt to manage the company. They're just sort of go along for the ride, because the hedge funds know that, unlike the PEGs who don't know they don't know anything, the hedge funds know they don't know anything, and so hedge funds go along for the ride. All of this has caused a tremendous drop in realized returns. Here's the proof. Now, at the Pepperdine, so I am saying intermediated value gap because PEGs, mezzanine, and venture capital, it's not their money, right? They're intermediaries of somebody else's money. That's what I mean by intermediate. At Pepperdine, we survey expected returns every 6 months. So what do the venture capitalists require or expect to get from an investment? Well, they expect to get a 38% return on investment. The mezzanine people expect to get 21%, meaning they structure the deals to get 21%. That's your key here. Accepted. And then the private equity for medium-sized deals, 5 to 10 million investments, around 30%. Now, for larger deals, the PEGs might require 20 to 25%. So hang in there with me. We're talking $5 to $10 million sort of investment deals here. So it's apples, apples, and apples. Well, Thomson Reuters actually studies what the returns have been over time to the limited partners. Now what do we have here? We have the VC shoot for 38, structured deals, get nothing. We got the mezzanine. How in the world is this even possible? given that half the returns coupon interest, that they get nothing. And then the private equity, this I expected because they don't know what they're doing. And so I look at this and say, okay, somebody explain to me why the returns were so much bigger 20 years ago. What was going on 20 years ago?
It was growth, capital appreciation instead of preservation.
Yes, we were still in the, and plus we didn't have 8,000 pegs, right? We just had Horseman Little and KKR messing around. And so back 2020, now if you were going back 25 years ago, you'd see even higher returns because there was less money chasing better deals. Now we have too much money chasing too few good deals, right? Because we're not generating valuable companies in the middle market. We're not creating enough valuable companies in the middle market, is there? So the biggest problem these intermediaries have is finding companies that can generate returns greater than the cost of capital over time. You either got to find companies and ride that horse that can do it, or you got to be the causing agent of it. And so it's that value engineering thing. We're right back to value engineering. You either have to find the owner who's a good value engineer and feed them money, or you've got to be the financial or the value engineer and show the owner, mentor the owner how to do it. Right now, we got neither. See, so we're getting these sorts of. Now, does this matter? Where did the money come from? Who are the limited partners that are getting these pathetic returns? Taking all the risk, they thought they were going to get returns closer to this, not exactly this, because you got to pay these people to do their jobs, but, and they're getting this. Who are these people? Who are these institutions that put up all this trillions of dollars?
Pension funds.
Pension funds. Well, okay, let's just stop right there. Do we have $1 trillion pension value gap in America? I think I'm writing an article about this right now, and the answer is yes, we do, meaning that they're underwater by that until, I think about half of that value gap comes from this. The other half comes from just making stupid decisions. I mean, come on. But I mean, about half of it came from betting on the wrong horses, so to speak. The banks were another big player. Well, you know, they were just putting money into this to have a seat at the table. So when the deals came, well, that didn't work out so well, I guess. The life insurance companies. So what we have now are large institutions that were banking, as they did their asset allocation for their models, they were banking on this being the risky, non-traditional asset classes, right? That's the code word, non-traditional. And they would get the higher returns here. Well, wait a minute. Couldn't they have just gone into the public Wall Street markets and gotten this? Yes, without all that risk. So now the awareness has come up with these institutions. So what's the result of this underperformance now? So what is happening? Yes.
First of all, I think it's much difficult. I'm more familiar with the venture capital. Much more difficult to raise new funds.
That's exactly the
and
first
the other
thing.
thing is that the expected return now, for my knowledge, is around 15 to 20%.
Yeah, now the expected
Which
return.
would be interesting to see if the 4.6 would be even lower, because I don't know if
Yeah.
there's a correlation.
And just for the benefit of the camera and future generations that might be watching this, yes, it's exactly right. Mainly the only time intermediaries can raise new funds is when they've been one of the winners of old funds. So the new guy is now, and then the other thing is as the realized returns drop, maybe it ratchets the whole expected return curve down, and that even forces the realized returns even lower. And you sit there and say, well, wait a minute, this is sort of like a non-virtuous cycle here. And in fact, this whole thing. The third thing that's happened is the big institutions are chasing and putting their money in other markets around the world. So if you go to China, anyone familiar with the venture market in China? That's a lot of U.S. money. And even the U.S. venture capitalists have cut and run. So a lot of the new cool stuff, green and other, is taking place in China because the U.S. venture, not totally, but mainly because the U.S. venture capitalists said, well, if we can't get returns here, let's go to where we get returns. And the PEGs have done a similar, not all the PEGs, usually it's the top 10% of each market, have done similar things because they're chasing higher realized returns. And frankly, that's a good bet. That's what they should do, because it's fairly clear to me as the guy that's driving this intellectual market more than anyone else in the world, the U.S. middle market, that we're not going to get it done in the U.S. We're just not. And I don't want to say that with any pride, because in some sense that's a failure on my part, but what we have here is an unwilling crowd. We've got, because to create substantial value in this current economy, you have to change your behavior and do things quite differently than what you were doing 15 years ago. Does that sound like the 60-year-old white middle market business owner? Who deals with that guy? Is he changing anything? No, he's not going to change. So what we have here is failure for the next 10 years, and then the next generation, who a lot of people don't have faith in, I do, because they're multitaskers. They look a lot different than the current generation of boomers, and thank goodness they do. They'll come along and sort of help reset this a little bit, but it'll be reset on a different yield curve. So all this will drop down, and then we'll build our way back up. But we've got about a 10-year period of the current boomer owners sort of going out with the tide. You know, so I'm not sure what's going to happen to them, although it's not good. That much I think. We have a very similar thing in the owner value gap. A value gap is what you want or think the value of your business is versus what the market says. What the owner, and these are key words now, what the owner value is versus what the market value is, that's the value gap. Now I show mathematically, yes, we'll take a question.
Just going back to the boomers, so do you see then that they are not going to have maybe an exit at all potential? Or?
Well, now we've got to be careful when we speak about the whole market. I see 80% of them won't. Because we see this right now. I mean, I run one of the bigger investment banking firms in America. It's sort of my day job. And we get 20, 30 referrals a week because of how I've set this up. And I'll tell you right now, 80 or 90%, we have to tell them, I'm sorry, Mr. or Ms. Owner, your business is worth nothing. And some people say it that way because people get mad. But basically, it's worth nothing. And so I'm the father of exit planning. I expected some music and some light around me there. I should have pointed that way. And because as you'll see later this morning, it's all my constructs that created exit planning. And so even though as the father of exit planning, I'm not a believer in exit planning for the majority of these boomers because they don't create enough value. So many of the exit planners are showing these boomers like they have real options with real money. They don't. I mean, it's a joke. The whole thing's a joke. And so, but for 10%, it's not a joke. 10% have access and real options. But if we're going to talk about the market, we sort of have to talk about the 80%, don't we, to define, yeah. And so it's not looking good for the boomers. And so what will happen is they'll either A, work forever, or B, end up taking what they can get, which is kind of what's starting to work through the market now. Instead of that, well, and it's classic. Well, I think my business is worth $30 million. Well, you know, the market's at 5. Come on. And so at what point does 5 look pretty good? You know, that kind of thing. So what we have here is, from an equity standpoint, equity cost capitals, this is what we survey at Pepperdine. It's around 20 to 30% or so cost of equity for these middle market companies, depending on size. 90% of these owners aren't generating returns on investment greater than that because they're not even attempting to. We have to educate 90% of these owners on what return on equity even means. Let alone run it. So when they hire a person or when they lease or buy a machine or when they're doing an acquisition, they're not even using mathematical constructs to determine whether they should determine whether they should make that investment or that move. I mean, come on. Good things only happen to the other guy who doesn't plan. We've got to plan if we want good things to happen. And so over time, the value gap grows, and I'm showing this in an article right now mathematically. The value gap grows over time. The longer you go without achieving returns greater than your cost of capital, the broader the value gap. It's tied to that. So we do have mathematical explanations. It isn't all just rock science. And so we've got a growing value gap that the owners are not going to meet most of the owners are not going to meet their requirements. Does this not sound eerily similar to what's going on with citizens in general in the U.S.? If they're not going to meet their retirement goals, that what they've done in the last 20 years isn't going to fund their retirement, and I got to do something. But what? What do? It's not easy. You got less time, less runway to sort of figure it out. Does this not all sound eerily familiar? Well, it's the same exact problem because well, the world changed and we didn't. I mean, it's just that easy. The world changed. The world caught up. It isn't the world smarter than we are. It's not that at all. The world caught up to us. We didn't keep doing the things that Steve Jobs told us to do. And so what's happened is we became static and the world's dynamic. We're in preservation mode. The world's in appreciation mode. And over enough time, and I guess 20 years is enough time, you really dig a pretty big hole here, right? So we've dug a pretty big hole here. Now, there is good news in all this, because in short order, in short periods of time, you can totally get on top of this, but it requires a large behavioral change, and I'll talk more about that here in a couple hours. I guess in 2 hours, I'm going to be talking a lot of cool stuff, so just hang in there. So So I think the value gap's killing us because the vast majority of U.S. employment is generated by private companies, not 53%, a lot higher than that. And so GE doesn't intend to create any more jobs in the U.S., or at least not, not as a percentage of sales growth. We only create, true or false, 95% of the revenues of private companies come purely from domestic sales. It's true, we only get 5% of our sales through export. Now, some companies do, but the vast, 95, 97% of the private companies don't have a dollar's worth of export sales. And so we're not participating where the customers are. Now, that's by choice. It isn't that, oh, you're not allowed to export. No, what it is just, people in Brazil don't necessarily speak American. What kind of provincial nonsense is that? I mean, so I own 20 mid-market companies personally over time. It's my hobby. I buy, build, and sell mid-sized companies. I buy out of bankruptcy. I buy from large corporate cast-offs. I never buy from an individual owner. Why? Because they need money, right? They want money. I got no money, so I always buy book value and then sell hopefully for something larger than that. And my goal with each one of those, and I met with each one of those, is to get at least 50% foreign sales. Yeah, but when I own that business and I sell that business, it's going to be 50% exports because that's what customers are. Come on. And so it just seems so obvious to me, but I guess it's not so obvious to everybody else. But what's happening here is and I think I can say that everything I just said, I can say about the EU as well as the US, I believe, is that when your engine for growth, which is the Main Street companies, when that engine stalls, we're in big trouble. Because GE doesn't care. They're not a US company anymore. They just happen to be headquartered here. And so, all right, so now we're going to wade into a different topic here. I've threatened you enough with all kinds of bad stuff. We're going to talk about who's had a corporate finance course here. Now, I'm not going to bust you on this. I'm not going to ask you. Well, if you took any sort of, not just MBA, but if you're an undergraduate in business, you had the principles of corporate finance course or something like that. The top textbook, and I did not use this book at Pepperdine as I've asked before, in the world for, I think, sales for is Principles of Corporate Finance is Breedy Myers. I had it as an MBA student back roughly 400 years ago when it was in the first edition. Now it's in the 7th edition. And I'm a guy, so I'm going to confess to a certain amount of envy here. Theirs is bigger. In the 7th edition, their book's about 1,200 pages, and mine fully loaded is like 750. But I'm only in the second edition, so I'll catch them around edition 7. Or not edition 5, the way I'm going, I'm getting. But anyway, here it is, the world's top, and for some reason the rest of the world uses U.S. textbooks, which I never understood, but they do, academic textbooks. And so there's only one reference in this 1,200-page Principles of Corporate Finance textbooks to private companies, and here it is, page 2. Somebody gets an idea and they form a private company. When it gets big enough, they take it public. What? The word private does not show up again in that book. Excuse me? The majority of the world's GDP is private, and yet you only use word private once? And so I sent them letters they don't answer because there's no answer to that. I mean, it's negligent as far as I'm concerned. But in any event, so here's what, and I have an insight on all this. For better or worse, and for most days it's worse. I studied the South Side of Chicago back in the early 80s, which was the heyday of University of Chicago School of Economics, and I was there. I had Milton Friedman, I had George Stigler was my advisor, I had 4 or 5 of the Nobels in economics. Corporate finance came from the economists. So corporate finance itself is a relatively new discipline that just came in the 1970s, basically. A bunch of economists, some of whom were at the University of Chicago, got together in a drunken bet and started explaining the large public markets relative through economist eyes, and another group of people came along, like Bill Sharp at Stanford and then created corporate finance around those ideas. And so I've asked, I think I'm up to a dozen Nobels in economics, did you ever intend any of your work to apply to the private capital markets? And they laughed. They said, all our work applied to perfect capital markets. It wasn't even meant to apply to large public capital markets. That's how far away we are. Well, in any event, here's what's still being taught in corporate finance, and it just breaks my heart. There's one primary capital market in the U.S., of course that's Wall Street. Corporate finance theory explains the behavior of the players in that one market, which is Wall Street. Every business has one true value. There's only one theoretically correct way to determine value in this one market, which is discounted cash flow. Is really the only one true way. Capital is allocated vis-a-vis a supermarket of securities, so it's the whole efficient capital market theory. Going public, why would you have a private business? By the way, how many public companies are there in the U.S., roughly? 14,000. So we have tens of millions of private companies if you want to consider the garage companies with no employees. We have 5.5 million private companies if you want to consider who has at least one employee. And only 14,000? So somebody's not getting the memo here that we're all trying to be public companies. Well, in any event, so one of the underpinnings of corporate finance is that why would you be in business unless you were going to go access the public market? Well, the problem with this is none of this is true. And yet this is what we're still teaching. Somewhere on this campus today, they're teaching this. And this is the epicenter of private capital markets study and knowledge. So you can imagine how much worse it gets. I mean, the penumbral thing, it gets just outlandish by the time you hit Chicago. I mean, they disowned me at the University of Chicago. I mean, my God, how could we put out such a rascal? You know? So Adam Smith had a couple things wrong. I think capital markets are segmented in the U.S., and you've already seen some part of that we're segmented in every possible way, actually. There's a number of finance theories that explain behavior, not just one. Middle market finance theory certainly doesn't explain all the behavior of the market, it just explains the behavior of one part of the market. I'll show you that every business has dozens of correct values at any one time, because this is a key part of middle market finance. Not one value. Private capital is allocated vis-a-vis the rules of a flea market, not a supermarket. it's a funny flea market. And then every year for the next 10 years, for the most part, more companies will go private than public. So we had a couple-year period there in the U.S. where no companies went public. And well, we'll see of those 14,000 public companies, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 of them get the benefit of being public, which means a lower cost of capital and liquidity. Those are the two big benefits. There's maybe only 3,000 or 4,000 that get that. The rest of them, what are they doing being public? Nobody knows. And so the pegs or somebody else will take out some part of those every year to go private. So what we have here is just a different way of looking at what historically has been a monolithic market, and now we're trying to, like anything that is studied over time, it will be brought down into smaller bits and bytes of understanding. Let's wade in. I wrote an article a number of years ago, 2005. I was younger and happier then. Public and private capital markets are not substitutes, where I show that the players in each of the segments define the terms risk and return differently. So the small business person defines, for instance, they have like psychic return. They want to feel good about themselves. I can only imagine, I used to be a manager of a large public company, and I can only imagine I'd gone in front of the board and say, well, you know, I don't really want to create any shareholder value here, but I just really want to feel good about myself. You know, well, feel good about yourself on the way out the door, bud. But anyway, so all valuation is an attempt to find a balance between risk and return. So if the players in each of the segments are defining risk and return differently, which they still do, you're going to have a different valuation construct in each segment. Well, liquidity is, of course, different. When I sold all but one of my operating businesses over time, how long did it take me as the broker and the owner to exit my businesses? The nanosecond that I could get out of my IBM stock? How long on the average? A year. A year. And that's where I control all factors, all facets. I control a year. I mean, my goodness. And these are medium-sized businesses. And so liquidity is obviously quite a bit different than that, than getting out of my IBM stock in a nanosecond. And management involvement is a good bit different. We have tradespeople running these small businesses, and we have more value architects and people somewhat concerned anyways with creating shareholder value on the large end. And you have everything in between going on. And so we have extreme, all of business, I know a couple of you, and I'm not going to bust you, a couple of you are valuation people. All of private business valuation is based that there's substitutability between public and private markets. And I've shown in 100 articles and in a couple books, so that's just nonsense. That is nonsense. And this is just the first shot across that bow. Here's another way of looking at public markets. These are the assumptions underlying large public markets versus the nonsense that we do in the lower middle market. A public market's got to be a C Corp. Most private companies now are going to be pass-through entities, flow-through entities. Values established by market. We have to stop the merry-go-round at some point in time to discover private value. You have ready access, no access. A key thing is you can diversify your investments in the public side, whereas what, 90% of our wealth is tied up in one illiquid asset. It's a hazardous existence being a private business owner. Professional management versus owner. The typical owner manager isn't in it to create a valuable entity. They're in it because of lifestyle and other reasons. They're control freaks. I mean, let's just say what it is. They're control freaks. Company doesn't really have infinite life anymore on Wall Street because I think with all the M&A, I think they're averaging about 30 or 40 years now. It used to be longer. How long? What's the percentage of companies transferring to the next generation to the private side now? Now being, let's underline the word now. What percent transfer from one generation to the next now in the U.S.? 10 is it. That's outstanding. And what did it used to be? The last time somebody did a study, what was it? It was 20 years ago. What was the number? Around 33%. Now, what happened, because I agree with 10, what happened with, well, how did it go in just one generation from 33% down to 10? What are the factors that caused that? Or are we wrong? Does anyone want to take the case that we're wrong at 10? You'd be on the wrong side of the argument.
Maybe the gap of valuation, as you explained. People are
That's a
expecting
big
to
part
get
of it.
more and
Yeah, they don't have as many options to transfer because there is no value to transfer. A big part of it, this is how I do things, because I haven't done the studies on this yet. A big part of it is the parents don't really trust globalization because they're of the generation that hasn't really globalized. They see nothing but risk. And if they're going to go a 10-year note for the next generation to like do the financing and that, they don't want to do that because they don't trust 10 years out. The kids are running the business right now and make 175 and get home by 6. So the kids know their kids. They don't know their parents as well as they know their kids. You see the big difference in lifestyle. The kids are smart enough to say, wait a minute, the parents are going to die someday. I'm going to get the cash either way. Why would we all want to risk this? And then there's always one kid that's a sibling that's not in the business, and Thanksgiving dinner's tough. You know what I'm saying? How do you treat that one fairly? And so there's been an uneasy alliance now in the family saying, isn't it just easier to get out and split cash? The answer is yes. But yes and no. I mean, it takes still a year to get out, but I mean, it is easier to split cash than it is to split shares. And so, am I saying we have no? Is the American dream totally broken and we're not transferring any business? No, there's still probably 10%. I was going to be the keynote speaker last year, the Family Firm Institute, who did the study 20 years ago and showed about a third of the firms until they saw my outline, which my outline in my talk was, we're down to 10% and here's why. Well, their mission is to get it above 33%. When they saw 10, we got vision, collision here. And so Rob went out with bathwater on that one. And so, but that's all right. Well, the biggest difference is at the bottom. We're attempting, a public company to maximize profits because that's what the market respects and the market values us on EPS and profit. Whereas it's not at all. As a private business owner, most of them are trying to get the money out of the business, right, to maximize their personal wealth, whether it's through other investments. Real estate has always been a popular thing. If you ask 90% of the owners to even describe what it means to have a valuable entity that they own, they couldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you. Because it's what we survey. They don't know. They don't even know what the variables are to create a more valuable entity. They may know a couple of them. They don't know. And so, because they're not in business for that reason. They're self-selected control freaks who want to control their own destiny. The best way to do is own your own business. They didn't get into business to say, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a $50 million entity, and in 5 years I'll hit that number, and I'm going to backward schedule all the things I need to do to get there, and I'm going to make that happen. Who's run into such an owner? I mean, come on. That's just not what they do. They don't think that way. And so now what's happened is there's a just comeuppance for not having thought that way. Because they've only looked at the return side of it from a personal standpoint and not the risk and return from a corporate standpoint. And now it's killing them. And it's killing us. Is it not killing us? Who's an intermediary here? What's the percent of phone calls or knocks on the door where you find an owner who really is knowledgeable about any of this stuff? Have you found one?
0.
Yeah, 0. I found one. And that's 25 years of knocking. I mean, every once in a while you'll find one. It's like manna from heaven. I said, where did you come from? And so because there's a certain intellectual curiosity with some of these owners, typically they parachuted out of a large corporation or mid-sized corporation that had disciplines. And they had formed disciplines in their mind, reporting and otherwise, and that translated into a private business. Those are the guys and the women that I've seen that think in terms of this. Do you see the problem? And I'm not going to pick any more on the pegs, because see, the pegs are now dealing with these owner managers. You see the problem the pegs have? the pegs really do want to create more valuable entities, but they're talking to these people that don't even know. They're speaking like Ukrainian, speaking two different languages, and it's very difficult for them to get on the same page. And what we've seen from the results is, more often than not, they're not on the same page, is what we've seen. So, okay, we're continuing to wade in. For some reason, I'm not done beating the segmentation horse to death. We've seen on one chart that return expectations relative to acquisition multiples are different by segment. Capital access and costs are different because we have a marginal cost of capital. Okay, I just said it out loud. We have a marginal cost of capital by segment, which I'm the only one who's ever made that argument, but it's true. The market mechanisms, I have a whole chapter in the book where I show market mechanisms, things like intermediation and information, all the market mechanisms that make a market. What is that chapter now? I moved it from chapter like 30 down to 2, I think. I think it's chapter 2, where I show market mechanisms. The institutions, Goldman Sachs isn't doing my deals, and I'm not doing theirs. So we have different institutions dealing in each segment. I think that we require different theories, financial theories, by segment. That's what Rob says. So let's take a look at this. What are theories? We're going to do a couple more slides. We're going to take a break so I can see you get nervous. The word theory has always been difficult for me. What was the, well, of course I'm 1,000 years old. What was the first theory, the word theory? And maybe some of you, unfortunately for you, some of you as old as I am. What was the first theory you were ever engaged with or ever heard about? What was that theory? Which particular theory? When you first heard the word theory as a young person, what was it? I can almost guarantee it was this way to think about it. E equals mc squared. Einstein really messed with our minds, didn't he? Because, time is relative, give me some alcohol or something stronger. And because it just isn't where we are wired to. So I had the same problem. So the word theory to me went right to scientific nonsense that I couldn't understand, I couldn't make sense of. Well, when I was writing the book and I was writing about a new theory, I had to make peace with the word theory. All theory does is explains, organizes, predicts behavior in the market you're trying to describe. Well, good theory predicts it well, bad theory doesn't predict too well. I mean, if we look at it that way, we can make peace with theory. I've said all along, as both a guy who was in corporate finance for a number of years, working for a large public company, and now a guy after 20-some years who's been outside of corporate finance, that corporate finance theories were never intended to predict behavior in small markets, private markets. It wasn't how they were created to do that, and they don't predict behavior very well. So, but first, let's look at where these big theories come from. Over 500 years, from almost the Renaissance on, various people, and this is before we really had economists, various people came up with big ideas, risk and return, rational man market, utility theory. There's a dozen or so of these meta-financial theories. The way I look at stuff is those theories are then applied down into the market that they're intending to describe. So for instance, corporate finance theory took what it needed from the meta-financial theories to describe behavior of the large public companies. Fine. When I created middle market finance theory, I took from the large meta theories what I needed to describe behavior in the middle market. Fine. What do we know about small company market theory? It hasn't been invented yet, so we don't know too much about it. Somebody will crawl into their cave, like I did, and 6,000 hours later, I have 6,000 hours in PCM's 1 and 2,000 more in PCM. I'm weighing in at 8,000 hours right now in that book. Somebody will crawl in their cave, come out holding a book, and they'll be totally insane, because you can't spend that much time writing about this kind of stuff without going totally insane. And they'll hold up the book and says, voila, we now have small company markets theory. Now the thing about it is, small company markets theory is 80% psychology, 20% economics. I think middle market finance theory is 50% psychology, 50% economics, and I think corporate finance theory is 80% economics, 20% psychology. Now we can argue all day long about those percentages, right? I think they're directionally accurate. I can only speak for sure for middle market finance theory, because that's exactly what I did. I couldn't just look at it. We're not in the middle market. If we were purely economic animals, wouldn't we all be trying to maximize the value of our business? Yeah, we're not. How is that possible? And so it's possible because of the psychology of the sort of person that invests in a middle market company. And so you got to respect, I had to respect the animals that I was trying to describe, because aren't we all like 6 genes away from, you know? And so there's a lot of a psychological element there. So we have at least 3 different theories. It's quite possible we have more. Here's our segmentation chart that I threatened you with an hour ago, and we're going to take a break after this chart. Where each set of small business, this is just a slightly different way of looking at that same segmentation. Small, lower, middle market, middle market, upper, defined by, once again, who defines these size ranges? It's not me. The private capital markets themselves define this. So the banks, I've been in Charlotte for 25 years, I had a front row seat of the 2 big, Charlotte's a big banking center, one of the 2nd biggest in the country now, I guess. And the banks first segmented themselves. Business banking, commercial banking, corporate banking. And then what happened is all the other players took their lead from that and they started segmenting themselves. So if you look at the pegs will describe themselves by segment. That we're a lower middle market player because that's how these things sort of rationalize. So the way I look at this is small company markets theory will explain the behavior of a certain range of companies. So you say, Rob, why doesn't that just go up to 5 million in sales? Have we ever seen a 10 million sales company that's run as a real small business? What does that company, describe the characteristics of that company? The owner does
Everything.
everything. The owner does everything. There's no institutionalization of management. And so what they do is they probably have one major customer, right, or 90% customer. So what's happening is that company would be described relative to small company markets theory. Now, have we ever seen a $3 million company that would be viewed by the markets as a middle market company? Well, I have anyways, and that's a company that has a functional management team, has visions and missions and strategies and goals and tactics, and they're somewhat aligned. That company's run as a middle market company probably because it's about to be a fair-sized company. So they made the investment up front, which I always have to do, and to create that launch pad. And so it can be viewed, it will be viewed, and what I mean by the private capital market is it will have access to private capital, middle market private capital. That's what I mean. Whereas a small company that's viewed as small company market will not have access to the private capital that we're about to describe. It's a cost of capital difference, and it's a major cost. It's not a small cost, as we're going to see. And I think corporate finance theory doesn't just apply, by the way, to public companies. When we took our box company out to 400 million in sales, what I noticed is about the time we had 250 million in sales on a run rate, we had changed cost of capital lines. All of a sudden, I had all kinds of interesting capital alternatives that I didn't like. Life insurance companies are coming to me, hey, you need 30 million bucks at 6%. What? I guess I do, and so what happened is we had changed cost of capital lines. I didn't know all this. I had to learn all this. I didn't know. I was bored like you. Didn't know nothing, And so I learned all this, and we had changed we started out in the middle market with the platform company, but we had changed cost of capital lines, and the behavior that I noticed in how we should be running our company was viewed more through a corporate finance lens than it was a middle market lens. And this was news to me because I didn't know. And so, but anyway, so all that highfalutin stuff I learned working for a big public company really did serve me well once we got up to a certain size. And we were a private company. So I don't want to make this always that, it's all private public. And size does matter here in terms of how the market's viewed. You can almost hit a public cost capital line when you're a private company if you're big enough, like Cargill. Where's Cargill's cost of capital? So the size doesn't matter here. Let's take a 7-minute break and then come on back. We'll get into good stuff. It gets better.